Yo, what's up? It's Jimmy on from Glitchy Thumbs. Today, we're looking at character 2.1. That's going to be the first character in character set number 2. This has been a pretty cool project that I guess I'm working on. I'm trying to build as many characters as I can just to see what I come up with. If you guys haven't checked out character set number 1, there was 5 characters. Came up with them. I tried to build a mechanic around it. I also created a 3D model in Blender, and I also drew them out in Procreate. So check out those videos. For character 2.1, let's check out what I came up with. We're going to be creating the character in Blender with our usual workflow: blocking out, UV unwrap, texture paint, rigging with Rigify, animation. The process is getting a little bit more efficient. Let's go to the video. I open up Blender, click General, drag in the reference for character set number 2. These characters I came up with in Procreate with a specific method where I just scribbled and then outlined whatever came to mind. If you want to see that video, there should be a link down below and it'll take you to that Procreate video. I delete the cube. We don't need that. Turn on the shortcut so you guys can see my mouse clicks and hotkeys that I'm using in Blender. Delete the camera, delete the light. We don't really need those. The reference, since it's an empty, it's really hard to get the cursor to be in the middle. I click this button above, click medium point. It brings the cursor right in the middle for us to move the reference. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm still trying to figure out why. I know it has to do with the reference being an empty, but I haven't really looked into why it makes a difference. I even try to do a quick origin on it, but that doesn't work. I just ignore it. Normally I have to turn on this arrow toggle. This way we can lock and unlock the reference so that we don't move it while we're creating the character. I click this image icon down below, change the opacity to about 30 to 40, and then go to side view so that we can move the reference back. This is how I set up my references in Blender for this character set. That's why I'm recording everything from the beginning, so you guys have an idea of how I do this. Possibly if this is something that you like, you can probably use this in your own workflow. I always start with references. That's just how I create characters. I need something to create from. Since these are characters that I came up with, it's okay that I use my own characters within my own games without having to deal with any copyright or trademark issues. Definitely make a note of that. If you're using references from the internet that have copyrights and trademarks and IP that you're not supposed to be using, you most likely can't use that in your own games without permission. It's good to just come up with your own characters, use them, then you won't have to worry about anything. Once we're done setting up the Blender file, I just save it in a different folder using the same naming convention, characters 2. Now we have our Blender file ready for us to create each of the characters. There's also 5 in this set, so it's going to be pretty cool to narrate what I came up with. Character 2.1, super abstract. Can't really tell what it is. It just looks like some sort of odd character. It has eyes, it has a nose, it has a tail, it has a weird body with something in the front. I have no idea what I drew for this sketch, but I guess it's like a abstract dolphin looking thing. Dolphin mixed with a horse with whatever. It's some sort of doodle. I guess that's the face at the bottom. I'm not really sure. I don't even know what I drew. Anyways, we start with a mesh. This is my go-to method to create the body shape, since it can create any kind of odd shape. This one definitely has a very odd shape. I go into X-ray mode, extrude to the far right of the body, extrude to the far left of the body, make a loop cut in the middle, extrude down with the left 3 vertices or edges so we can get that area that looks like the mouth. I think that's the mouth. I just see like a happy face. And then extend the rest of the plane on the left to cover our reference. I make a loop cut so that I can move that vertice without ruining the shape so we can get that circular shape. Make another loop cut, use the middle mouse button to scroll so we can get 3 loop cuts. I can actually round the rest of this mouth area. I know what you guys are thinking, like, what the heck is that character? I really don't know, but that's the fun part about it. We don't really know what the character is. We don't even know what the mechanic's gonna be. That's the entire part of being spontaneous, having some sort of surprise and wonder. Just makes the video more exciting to see where I took the entire game idea with this character. Again, I usually start with prototypes, so it's not like I'm building a full game just yet. I extend to the right so that we can actually get the tail area at the bottom, or the fin we'll call it, the back dolphin fin. You can see Blender is fairly simple to understand after you know the default commands to use, such as extruding, insets, move, scale, and then just learning all of the modifiers. You can actually create some pretty cool 3D models. You get to be very creative in a 3D space. This is just a way to express yourself with your own characters. Who really cares what people say? Art is subjective. Some people might find it cool. Some people might find it ugly. Some people might find it inspiring. Some people might find it horrendous. But who really cares? We're actually just practicing and getting better. That's what we care about at the end of the day. I move this vertex to the right. Normally, I wouldn't do this because of that edge in the middle, which creates like a slant. I try to keep my edges straight as possible. I use the knife tool instead and just knife from that vertex to the other one. That way we can just delete this triangle that's pretty close to our shape for this dolphin fin looking thing. Definitely the knife tool is super helpful. If you're using a plane, you can pretty much knife anywhere and get the exact shape that you're looking for. I do use it heavily in my future characters because it just makes the process much more simpler, faster, easier to explain for people that are creating characters. You could just delete the faces of the areas you don't need. You can have pretty odd random shapes. You can definitely see some improvements in my character design if you've been watching my previous videos with character set number 1. Character set number 1 was just the beginning of me figuring out my own workflow process for creating characters in Blender. Some parts were just ridiculously long and I had to explain things in the video, which I watched over and over and they were super confusing. These new characters in character set 2, definitely I cut down a lot of the clutter. I'm actually creating these characters much faster. I'm not spending too much time explaining what I did. Now everything can be a little bit more smoother. I can actually focus on creating characters faster, but also learning new things in Blender so that we can create more complex characters as I progress. Definitely check out those videos. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you like it, if you hate it, I would like to hear all your feedback. That would be great. Hope you guys are enjoying these characters because I am. I extrude the rest to the top of the reference so we can get the rest of the body, do some loop cuts, grab these side vertices, and then just extrude to get that tail, and then just extrude up. That looks weird because we're missing that triangle close to the end of the tail, but maybe I do fix that, but not too sure. I'm probably just trying to get the rest of this tail. Most of the time I'm winging all this. There's no like actual instruction manual on how I'm going to create this character. You just have to eyeball everything and go with the flow and just keep extruding your plane and then just making cuts to get the final shape that you like, but also not having your vertices and edges all over the place. That's just going to be bad for your UV unwrap and also your texture paint. If you're doing pretty complex textures, they're probably going to come out weird. They're not going to wrap correctly over your character. Most of the time, my characters have solid colors, so I don't really have an issue, but that's definitely something to make a note of. I'm not like a professional at this or anything. I'm just experimenting, just trying to create my own characters. It's something I've always wanted to do. I've always hired designers and artists to create my characters based on references that I would give them and just going back and forth with the sketches until we got to a final character that I liked. But I wanted to cut out that process on its own and just have myself creating the characters. So I was already doing all the research, looking for references, different features that I like, and then just doing the back and forth anyways. So I just decided to maybe just learn it myself. That cuts out the middleman, but also makes everything much more faster because I can just create my characters at any time. I obtain that skill set as well. It does take time to learn, but I think it's super valuable now that I know it. I'm just going to keep practicing until I can create some pretty cool characters that end up being in some pretty cool game mechanics or even full games that I make. That's the new thing that I'm enjoying about this. It's a different way of thinking for me. It's a little bit more on the creative side, but that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tap back to more of my creativity side. I felt like I was spending a lot more time on the business side of things and just managing multiple games that I produced, but then you end up losing like the love for the other parts of the game business. That's what kind of drawn me to the entire mobile game industry, was that I got to create whatever I wanted to. Making these characters brought me back to that. I was watching some of my old videos. I was going through the process of how I came up with this game idea, and it always started with the character design, the sketches, and that's where the spark happened for me again. That, hey, let's just start over, come up with new characters, come up with new game ideas. Everything will be fresh from the beginning. So that's where my head's at. Like, even if it's abstract, it's still fine. These characters will serve some sort of purpose, and it creates pretty cool content. For me, I guess for all you guys that are watching, just something to look back on. This tail, I guess, was giving me some issues. I was trying to get this area to be correct. Normally, there's going to be a lot of dead space. You can just delete those faces if it's distracting. I try to complete different parts of the reference first before thinking about the other parts. And these edges look okay. Well, I mean, there's not much texturing on this character anyways. I still can't tell what's good and what's bad 3D meshes. Like, to me, as long as I finish the character and get the 3D model finished in this entire process, that's fine with me. It doesn't use as much triangles or has as much faces, so it doesn't take up a lot of memory because I plan to use this in a game mechanic. That's what I think about. I'm getting this plane pretty spot on to the reference for character 2.1. Just requires a little bit of patience, trial and error, a little bit of practice. You gotta be confident with everything that you do and you'll be fine. Definitely when I'm creating these characters, I'm not gonna lie, I actually thought like, oh, this isn't gonna be good enough to actually show in a video, but you know what? I just recorded it and now I'm doing the voiceover and we're just going to put it out. Otherwise, it's just going to sit on my hard drive and not do anything. The point is just to express my art and creativity and then just go with the flow and see what comes about it. I do want to practice on content creation. This is new content for me because I've never done character design before myself. This is actually a pretty cool journey that I'm going on. It's cool to have everything recorded for me to post on all the different social media platforms. That's the plan. This is how my videos are going to be pretty much. I plan to do tutorials in the future. I just like the thought process type videos for me because I want to capture what I thought about when I was watching these videos, also things that I stumble upon that I didn't before, also stuff that I want to maybe work on with this character for future reference. All right, we finally get to this area of the mouth. I think that's the mouth. I delete those faces and just try to create a hole. This is the first time I actually created a hole into my character, I think, because they're all just super solid with different objects. But this is the first one where I experimented with creating a hole in the mesh. Those edges and vertices definitely look all over the place for sure. I feel like maybe I needed to clean that up a little bit, but I'm not too sure. But for me, that's not an issue. We got to the shape that's similar to the reference. All we got to do now is to go through the process of extruding, deleting the back faces, and then applying all transforms. I actually undo it and open up the toolbar so that I can do it again because I just like recording that for the video, just so you know what's going on with the all transforms. If you guys been watching, you know why I do that, because it resets the location, rotation, and scale, and then apply the quick origin. That's a pretty much standard workflow that I do after getting the shape correct for the plane. You have the mirror modifier and using clipping to bring the middle vertices together. That already looks like our character, but just flat. Looks pretty cool already for a 3D mesh. Now we just need to pull out the edges to give it a little curvature. I have a hard time saying that word, curvature. I moved this to a new collection, character 2.1, renamed the empty to reference, renamed the plane to body. You can see that I'm using standard names that I always use across all the videos. It's just easier to use the same names. Sort of like a reflex now. At the eyes, I use a UV sphere again, but this time I actually stretch it because in the reference, it's a little bit more higher than our normal eyes. Just duplicate for the right side and then rotate it to match the reference. The reference is just there to guide us. We don't have to do it exactly like our reference. It was just a sketch. Plus you start thinking of different things in Blender when you're more hands-on. At least I do. Like my brain is just thinking, okay, how can we create this character as best as I can in a short amount of time? I pull out the edges. I'm surprised I did this after the eyes. I normally do this before adding any other objects. This was pretty straightforward. Always go from left to right. But for this character, there's some definitely long edge loops. So you have to analyze, okay, how do I want to pull this? Because there's different shapes going on. Because the top part was the head, and then you have the body. Maybe that wasn't a mouth. I don't know what the front is. This is starting to look like one of those rocking horse chair things. That's probably where the idea came across in my head. Maybe I saw that on the internet or something, and that just crossed my mind when I was creating the sketch. Definitely watch that video if you haven't already on how I created these characters in Procreate. I'm pretty random. There's really no explanation on how this character came about. It's just whatever came to mind based on the lines that I drew, and then you just go with the flow. During this time, I was practicing in Procreate with the Apple Pencil. So when you start off, you end up creating abstract characters, but eventually you'll see the other cool characters that I came up with. There's a lot, actually. Hopefully I can create them all. I do need to focus on trying to build a game, one that I really like. That's actually the end goal, but also I really want to practice creating better content too. Either way works fine with me. We get to the tail portion as I'm pulling out this edge, and you can see there's some hidden edges, and you can actually merge those vertices. But now that I'm looking at it, this would have been an actual cool design for the tail portion of this character. Sometimes you can actually just add features to your character without even noticing it, because I probably was trying to fix this during that time. But if I look at it now, that would have been pretty cool to pull that out, and then you'll have some sort of crevice area right there for the tail, and actually dissolve that. Yeah, once you get an idea of how the edges and the vertices work, you definitely get a little bit more comfortable creating the 3D models. I at least feel more comfortable with it now because it doesn't feel like I'm experimenting anymore. It feels like I'm actually creating from knowledge, if that makes sense. I definitely practice a lot more before getting to this point. There's definitely characters that I created before creating all these videos, but I decided not to put those ones out. They're not in the character sets anyways, and I don't plan to use them all in games. They were just like practice Blender projects to get an idea of Blender. But if you guys want those videos too, maybe I'll put those ones out. You can definitely see my beginning stages in Blender. More complex shapes require more time. Just make note of that. The only way you're going to get better is if you actually practice. There's just really no way around it, especially with 3D models. I just find it easier to create 3D models because I can visualize it and rotate around and see the shape and know what it's going to look like. I think that I mentioned this before, that I actually have a hard time creating pixel art or even doing 2D animation because it's really hard to think about what to draw for the animations to get different like animation cycles. Like that one requires a lot of creativity. I just like this process better. I just find it a little bit more natural for me to create 3D models. It looks pretty cool when you're creating it. If there's a super cool character that I like, maybe I'll get it like 3D printed or something. That's definitely something I always wanted to do, just to bring it into reality as toys or some sort. But that's for another time. We just got to focus on creating some games with these characters. Bam! We're done with blocking out character 2.1, which brings us to the UV unwrapping portion of the video. I mark a seam down the middle as usual, but before I do that, I see this vertex that shouldn't be there, so I use the target wheel from my quick favorites to combine those vertices. I'm looking inside the 3D model now because I think that's what we did in the previous video, where there's sometimes hidden faces while we're unwrapping. I guess I could have just opened it up like this. I normally don't think about opening up the shape again after using the clipping. That's actually a smarter way to do this instead of trying to scroll and look on the inside, which is making our life more difficult. Definitely, I'll probably do that in the future videos. See, I don't notice certain things until I'm watching myself creating the character, because when you're actually creating the character, you don't really think about certain things. It's like different things fire off in your brain when you do different tasks. Like right now I'm narrating, which means I'm just observing, I'm analyzing, I'm seeing it from a different perspective so I can actually comment on it. It's more of a bird's eye view of what I'm doing versus actually doing all the hands-on work. I'm just marking simple seams in the beginning, down the middle, and then one in the hole. Same thing for the eyes. That's how I pretty much started out with my UV unwrapping before I got into more complex shapes. Normally I do this in UV editing with the UV sync selection on, but I think during this time I was just marking seams and then just pressing U and clicking unwrap, because that's what I learned at the time. There's an odd edge right here in our shape that doesn't look correct. This is definitely the importance of making sure your edges and vertices are correct, because they'll come out like this in UV editing and you have to troubleshoot where this edge or vertex is. It's a simple fix. Usually you can just use the target wheel and connect the vertices, or you can just delete the faces that you don't like. You usually have to unwrap again. Sometimes you actually don't get the edge that you're looking for, but you can also delete certain edges and then undo to see what happens. I'm trying to get rid of this piece that just looks very, very odd. Shouldn't be stretched like that in UV editing. Be careful using target wheel, because sometimes you can actually wield the wrong vertices and that just messes up your 3D mesh. You can always undo, but every time I do mess up, it throws off my flow, because now you're actually having to fix another issue. Just select that face and then delete it. That gets rid of that long UV that we saw. When you have a hole like this in your 3D mesh, the way I fill it is clicking all the vertices and then pressing F on the keyboard. I don't know if this is a correct way to do it, but if the option's there, it should be a good solution. I just need to mark that seam and then unwrap again. And then we have our final UV for the body. For this character, you definitely want to align it to match the direction of the character, or just get it similar, because I think I was planning to draw the nose. So you can select the edges to see where everything is and then just rotate it. Sometimes it's super hard to see because our UVs look very different from our character. I could have cut it a better way, but we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. Now this is the correct alignment for the UVs. You can definitely see the shape now on the UVs and how it's being unwrapped. It's kind of like a metal wrapper on a piece of chocolate. So if you can visualize that, you'll definitely understand what I'm talking about. And then we can move on to unwrapping the eyes again. This time I unwrap both of the eyes and then just select both of them at the same time so that I can align it. They're both being stacked on top of each other right now, since we have two separate eyes, because I don't have a mirror modifier on. Since I use the eyes a lot as a 3D object, I definitely should create a preset that I use that I can just drag into Blender that already has the eyes unwrapped and aligned, because that's a pretty common 3D object that I use across multiple characters, because everything has eyes. So it's definitely a good idea. I should probably do that. It's good that I'm talking about it in this video. That way I don't have to keep redoing the unwrapping for the eyes. I've practiced it so many times, so I definitely don't need that extra practice, and I should save that time and effort on other 3D objects that I create that are a bit more complex. I applied this mirror. I think I did that because I'm planning to draw the nose on the front, so we need to have two separate locations for the color on the texture. You see, if you've already aligned it and then you unwrap again, now you have to redo everything again and align the newly unwrapped UVs. You definitely have to think ahead before rotating and aligning them, otherwise you're gonna have to do them again. But there's a way to keep your UVs in place, which I show in the future characters, but I haven't gotten there just yet. But if you would like to know, you would actually just select those UVs and press P, and it pins them into place. And then anytime you unwrap a new UV, it doesn't ruin all the alignment and rotation that you've already done. That's what I learned when I was practicing unwrapping the UVs. Like, each part of this character development process requires a different type of thinking. It's a pretty long process if you're not a super patient person. It can get pretty tedious, but I actually really like creating the characters, so I don't even notice because I have music on when I'm doing most of my character creation in Blender, also creating the game mechanics in Buildbox. So it kind of helps with the time, and it gets me into a flow. For the body UVs, I'm not sure why I do this. I usually make the UV that I'm planning to draw on larger because it's easier to, I guess, draw the texture on top of it. The one in the back, I just make it super small because I plan to use a solid color anyways. That's why you'll notice that happening across different characters. Like the same method that I use over and over until I find a better alternative. I think I duplicated the 3D model for the body because I wanted to keep one that was UV unwrapped. I don't know why I wanted that backup. I don't know. That's just what I thought of at the time. Because normally I just save the backups for the separate objects, but I never renamed it as UV unwrapped. Now I create a new file for the texture, character 2_1_ texture, and save this. And that completes our UV unwrapping. It's pretty simple. And we can actually get to texture painting now. We need to add a new material. Since this is a new Blender project, we don't have our previous materials that I would use with the image texture, so we're creating a new one now. This is a good thing so that you guys can actually see this. Under the base color, you click image texture and then just select that texture that I just created, and it'll show the black color, which is the same color on the left side. Assign that same material for the eyes. Now we can actually choose our gray colors for the character. Since this is a new Blender project, we don't have our color palette that we normally use, so we have to eyeball the different colors again. But you can actually add color palettes from your previous Blender projects into your current Blender project. That's the useful tactic that I've been using. That way you don't have to redo a color palette that you've already had. You just need to append it from a previous Blender project. That's also going to be in a future video. Be on the watch for that if you're not familiar with how that works. You know, I always use a gray color for my characters and then white for the eyes. I still don't know why filling in the color on Blender creates like these different specks sometimes. It's like a weird inconsistency that happens, but then you just have to draw over it and it's fine. I don't know why that happens. It just happens here and there. I normally click this bracket looking button in the fallout. That creates a more harder brush for our textures because it's set to like some sort of soft brush. I don't really like that for some reason. Well, I mean, I'm not really painting in Blender, so that's why it's set to that as a default. Now we need to draw the pupil, which is just going to be a black dot right in the middle. Super simple. Draw it directly in the middle on the left side or the right side. I'm selecting this circular edge loop and trying to scale it in. I'm not sure why I was doing that. You can see I'm trying to figure it out because I was trying to scale it in a way to create the pupil, I guess. But yeah, I have no idea why I was doing that because I could just fill it in and it pretty much looks the same. Maybe I was trying to make this perfect. That's the problem of trying to be a perfectionist, because you're trying to do a lot more work for something as simple as this when I could just filled it in and it would have been done and we could just move on to the next task. I don't know why I was doing this here because I know this method itself doesn't look right anyways. When you fill it in, it just never fills in correctly, at least for me. In the menu at the top, I usually also click options. There's this bleed option and I increase that to more pixels. That way the texture bleeds out more outside of the UVs. You don't have these weird black areas since our main color of our texture is black. It doesn't affect the eye, but in general, if you guys need to know that. And it's just better to draw in the eye on the left side because then you get a better rounder shape. And you can see the UVs is right in the middle and I'm doing a little bit more on the outside. And you can see it's kind of like blurry with some weird edges. That's probably what I was trying to figure out with this character when I was grabbing those circular edge loops. It's probably trying to get it to be a little bit more smoother. I know if you grab those circular edge loops and scale it in, and that's what I'm doing right now, makes the pupil smoother. That's what I discovered while creating the character. I'm not sure why it's like that, but it just looks better, I guess. That's the way to do it. If that's something that bothers you, where your textures are like having weird blocky edges like that, like pixelated edges, don't forget to save the texture. As always, because I completely forget to save all the time when I'm doing anything. Before you start drawing directly onto the 3D mesh, we always look at the face orientation because it's always going to be red and we need to flip them. That's just going to be a common thing, I guess, for all the planes in the future characters. So definitely make a note of that. But now at least we can actually draw on top of the 3D mesh and not have to figure that out anymore. It was definitely annoying not knowing why I'm not able to draw on top of the mesh, is because the normals weren't flipped. So now I can go into X-ray mode and draw this nose. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just use it as a placeholder for now. You can always fix it later. You can see this time around, the drawing looks so much better than before. This is why having your UVs aligned and straight like this makes a difference. I think the text itself is more visible when you have like a rectangle as a 3D mesh in the area where you're drawing on. I guess it doesn't stretch as much as well. I'm still trying to learn how to get better at this stuff, so it might sound like I have no idea what I'm talking about, because I do have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm just going with the flow. I grab this circular edge loop and scale it up to get more of an identical pupil to the reference. That one actually looks pretty good. Like the eyes look way smoother, and I'm probably thinking about doing the same around this face for the nose. So definitely when you're stretching these edge loops where the texture is, it makes the texture much more smoother. So it's definitely something I should be taking a note of for my future characters. I'm probably just experimenting now, since I learned that with the pupils earlier. I'm dragging them in, so now he has smaller noses. This actually looks not bad. I probably just kept it the same. Yeah, I'm definitely spending a bit too much time on the nose. I don't even know why I'm touching my own nose. It's kind of like making my nose itchy watching this video and trying to fix it. Like feel something on my nose and stuff. It's probably just all in my head. Once we're done with the texture, we just have to save it. That was super simple. Not much to do with this character. Now we can get to rigging with Rigify, and I add a single bone. I forget exactly what bones I used for this character. Most likely the spine bone, head bone, tail bone, tentacle maybe. So you start off by just deleting that bone. Definitely basic spine and the head bone, which makes sense. See, for this character is actually pretty clear on where to put the bones because of the way the character is actually structured. Because for the previous characters, they were just like heads on the floor or something like that. They didn't really have a specific body type. So that's going to happen sometimes, but this one is pretty self-explanatory just by looking at this character. Even though it's like abstract, you can tell what bones to use. And again, you can use any type of bone you want. And I go in the side view just so I align the bones correctly on each perspective. Sometimes the bone is kind of rotated weird like this. To rotate it correctly, you'll need to click that bone icon and go to roll and just eyeball and select the correct degree. I don't know exactly what this does, but it just keeps everything aligned. I should probably look into that. I add the tailbone. Some of these bones require you to keep all the bones that it's generated with before you generate the rig, because if you delete one of the bones and you need it, you won't be able to generate the final rig. So that's why some of these bones have 3 or 4 bones, because it's just a default. You can see I'm extruding another bone here to get the correct shape. I don't know if this works exactly. Maybe I delete it later on, but we'll see in the video. Normally, you can just extrude as many bones as you like. You just have to be cautious about it if you're using BuildBox, because if you use too many bones, there's like a limitation. So try to use as little bones as possible, just more so for animation purposes. A new bone that I use, I guess, is the leg bone. I don't think I used that in the previous characters. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but this looks new in terms of me explaining it. The leg bone definitely looks confusing at first, but you'll definitely get the hang of it. It looks like this was rotated incorrectly. I probably should have rotated it first before using it. Yep, that's what I do in the video. Now this looks like the correct direction. For the leg, there's a thigh bone, a shin bone, a foot bone, a toe bone, and a heel bone. You have to align them as best as you can so that the character uses this as a foot for animation. It just keeps the 3D mesh connected to the ground. That's why I like using the leg bone. Helps with the animation. If you don't have a leg bone, the character actually lifts off the ground, and you'll see it in the animation portion. It can get kind of confusing if the character has an odd shape like character 2.1 does. So you have to experiment how you use the leg bone, especially for this shape. That's not really like a real leg, but you get the idea. The heel has to match the width of the character, or at least that's what I learned. So that's why I'm extending it and putting it at the bottom. What other bone do I use? And then the eye bones is the basic super copy. Just select the vertex and shift select cursor to selected to get the cursor there, and then just add the bone for the eye. I think out of the entire process, I think rigging would be probably the most difficult one because there's a lot of things to remember. Definitely when I started with rigging, I did not remember all of these different type of bones, and then knowing what type of layers to name them and then moving the layers over. There's definitely a lot to remember, but now that I've practiced enough, it's gotten a little bit easier. But as you have more complex characters, you definitely want to create better animations, but that requires more bones to get the right movements. Once we have these bones in place, as usual, add standard. This shows the different colors with names and numbers. Add the Rigify layer names. For this, I have the eye, the head tweak, the spine FK, spine tweak. I definitely looked at my notes for the rest of the layer names because during this time I didn't really remember it. Since we have new bones, we have the leg IK, the leg FK, and the leg tweak, and then the tail and the tail tweak. We'll just move these to their different rows based on the different bones. The eye's on row 1, the head's on row 2, spine's on row 3, the legs on row 4, and the tail's on row 5. So you guys definitely get the point of that. And then the usual is just 5 for any of the FK bones, and then 4 for any tweak bones, and then just use a different value if there's another bone, like I used 3. This is just all for different colors for the layers that you use for animating later on. That's what keeps it separate. And then number 2 for the IK, and then you just 5 and 4. Select the bones, starting with the eyes, and move it to their correct layers. So layer 0, which is 1, is going to be for the eye, and layer 1 for the head. And you can usually see the layer number on the bottom right when you're hovering over that square. Blender starts at 0, so that's why number 1 is at layer 0. You can always click that window button to unhide the bone. That's how you know that bone is on that layer. Spine is on layer 3, which is number 4, and the leg is on layer 6, which is 7. I have to count them sometimes. It's hard to remember everything. And the tail is on layer 9, which is number 10. If you mess up, you can always click the window buttons to make those bones visible and then just fix it and move it over to the next layer. Super simple as you learn the process, but complex if it's new to you. Once we have those bones in place, we go to pose mode. We need to move the FK, IK, and tweak layers to also the layers. I expand Rigify type for the head, and I move the tweak layer right after the dot because that's where the main bone is. I do the same for the spine. The FK goes right after the dot, and the tweak goes 2 spaces after the dot. That's because we have 3 separate rig layers. For the spine, for the leg bone, the FK goes right after the dot, and the tweak layer goes 2 spaces after the dot. So that's probably an easier way to memorize where to put the FK and tweak bones, depending on which Rigify sample you use. That's just how I remember it. You gotta make sure to move those layers first to even get the dots. For the tailbone, there's only a tweak layer, so it goes right after that dot. Once we're done with that, we go to object mode. This is where generate rig will show up. It won't show up in edit mode. Make sure to remember that if you're using Rigify. I click generate rig. You can see there's an error because the tailbone requires a chain of 2 or more bones. Sometimes that happens and your rig doesn't generate, so you have to read the error and figure out, okay, what did I do wrong here? Most likely, if I remember correctly, it was that I either deleted one of the bones or that bone that I extruded shouldn't be there. So that's why I deleted that bone on the upper part of the tail. And I tried to extrude another bone from a different joint, and then go back to object mode, try to generate the rig again, and it says successfully generated rig. That's how you know it works. When you actually see the rig layers showing, when it's behind the mesh and the meta rig, bring it up to front. That's how you know the rig was successfully generated. Sometimes you just have to experiment to see what went wrong, you can always undo. Try not to worry too much about it. I know in the beginning it was hard to determine why the rig wasn't working, but after you worked with so many rigs, you just understand that there are times you just need to troubleshoot just a little bit and you'll be able to figure it out. And I was able to do that. It was a simple fix. It's going to happen multiple times, especially if you're using a Frankenstein type rig that I'm using. It's going to happen. And you just got to be able to troubleshoot and solve the problem on the fly without worrying too much. That's why I suggest to start with simple bones first, like I did in the previous videos, where I barely used any bones, just probably the spine and the head. Just use that and then just experiment with the rig and then start adding on more bones when you're ready to do more complex rigs. That's how I learned, and that usually just makes sense for me for anything that I do. I always go simple first and then move into complex. You got to know things in the most simplest way before you move to the complex stuff. That's just how my brain works. Once you know how to troubleshoot the most simplest errors, the complex stuff will just be no problem for you. So just give it a try. Don't be too worried and just have fun making some rigs. What did I do here? I duplicated the left and right eye because I wanted a backup, which I put into the mirrored folder. So whenever you need backups, just duplicate it and then put it into a folder. That's what I do. And then make sure to name them so you know what those folders are, or do a screen recording so you understand what you were doing at that time and you can refer back to it. Normally I do this before joining all the objects, which I'm doing here with the body, left eye, right eye. Since they're joined, they end up inheriting one of the names. You have to rename it back to body or whatever you like. I always stick with body because that's just the name for the body of every character that I use. I tend to stick to one name that I like for a specific mesh. Otherwise, it's going to get confusing when you have to come up with a bunch of different names. I'd rather just stick to one thing and then that's the file name forever. When you're ready to parent them together, you select the body, shift select the rig, and then Control P with automatic weights. You can see the body was combined within the rig. Now you can go to pose mode and move your rig just to see if everything was parented together correctly. So you can move the different layers, and I move this layer at the top. You can see his back does a little wave. I'm just grabbing different bones to see what each does. Since this character didn't really have separate objects, normally like my previous characters would have, the rig actually moves a lot much better with the different parts. Like the front area and the tail moves correctly with the rig. Everything deforms correctly. That's something I've been trying to improve upon. Normally I have separate objects and I join them together, but all the vertices are still not connected within each of the meshes. So then the movement's really weird with the rig. So I really like when a 3D model is actually one whole object because everything just animates much more fluent. I'm moving one of the FK layers for the leg. You can see it's not actually moving our character. That's because sometimes you have to switch between IK and FK depending on the bone. I'm not sure if I show that in this video. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I definitely show it for a future character for sure. I experiment with various different things with all the characters. That's just how I'm choosing to learn this entire process. I grab this neck layer and I'm just moving it up and down like he's bobbing his head. I have no idea what to call this character because it's just very odd and nosy. Maybe that's the nickname we'll give it. Nosy Tails because he has two tails. Nosy Tails. I don't know. Leave a name in the comments. Let me know what you think. Give me the most oddest name possible and your name might be chosen for character 2.1. I moved the eye layers and it doesn't do anything for the eyes is because I didn't parent them to the bone. I think I mentioned this before, but there's a limitation in build blocks where if I do that, it'll just disappear. Making the eye layers, including all the eye bones, are not necessary, but I just do it as practice in case I might need it in the future. I end up deleting the rig. I'm not sure why. Sometimes there's this armature folder full of things, and if you delete it, it still leaves a bunch of bone files. I delete that. I try to keep everything nice and organized, otherwise it's gonna be confusing in Blender. I undid that and I still don't know why. It's quite interesting watching my process and then narrating it after. This is the only way I get to analyze everything that I'm doing. This is also to refresh my memory for each character on the different things that I learned and how to improve it for the next character that I work on. It looks like I undid everything because I was trying to unparent the rig from character 2.1. How you do that is select the mesh and the rig and then press Alt P, and then you would clear the parent. That separates the body from the rig, and then you can delete that armature folder because it's not needed anymore. This is a way to delete a rig that you don't like and keep your body mesh, because you still have your armature that you created. If you want to make changes to the armature, you can add additional bones. You can move bones around. You will always have this armature for this character. You can always generate a new rig. That's the thought process here. And the reason why I deleted the generated rig, because I forgot to do a step that was to parent all the bones to each other so that they're connected. You can see that there's no dotted lines to tell what bone is connected to what. And I should do a video probably on the difference between the two, because to me it feels like it still works with the generated rig and you don't really need to parent anything, but I haven't tested that out. There's just a bunch of things I haven't tested. I just do things, and if it works, it works. Even if I'm missing a step and it works, it just works. I might as well just keep going with my process, because why stop? I parent the eyes to the head bone, and then parent the neck to the spine bone, and then parent the tail to the spine bone, and then parent the leg to the bottom of the spine bone. I'm still not sure which bone it should also be applied to. It just makes sense in terms of like thinking the human body, which bone is connected to which. So normally that's how I look at all these separate bones, that certain bones should be connected based on logic. I generate a new rig, and this one definitely works. I check in front and I hide the armature, select the mesh, select the rig, click with automatic weights. My mouse is acting all funky because I need to charge it. All right. Okay, back to the neck bone. We're moving it up and down for the head bob, and then move the tail, and everything seems to work smoothly for character 2.1. That brings us to the animation portion of this video. I bring up the timeline down in the middle. Always start as 0, of course. Go into pose mode to keyframe all the movements. Normally I press the record button. It's so that any movement that I do, it records that at a certain frame. I don't think you need to turn it on, but I do anyways. I also just keyframe them in by pressing I. So I think you can do both ways. You can have the record button on and it'll automatically record your movements, or you can have it off and then just press I and it'll record that specific movement for your character, depending on what layer it is. I really liked the neck layer. So that's the first movement we're going to be doing. We're definitely going to get this head bob because it looks pretty cool for character 2.1. This tweak layer towards the nose looks a little bit weird because of how it deforms our texture in front. For the neck, I keyframe the location and rotation at the 0 frame. This is going to be the current pose for the neck. Basically no movement. This is the rest pose. I move it up. I open up this toolbar so that you guys can see what's really happening. When I move it up, the location changes for X, Y, and Z. That's how Blender knows what you're doing with these characters. The way I normally do it is I will move that bone to a position that I like, and I'll look at the values at the upper left, and then I'll press undo to get it back to the rest position. Now that I have a value that I like, I will move the neck bone again, but this time I'll actually type in 0.1 or something, and I'll move it up by 0.1. I forgot to be on the 10th frame, because when we move it up 0.1 in the 0 frame, it actually replaces the rest pose, which is what we don't want. We want it to move after X amount of frames, because that's how the animation works. Now on the 10th frame, I can move it up by 0.1. On the 20th frame, we can move it down by 0.1. So you would type in negative 2.1 to get it back to the rest pose, or you can duplicate the keyframe on the 0 frame and move that to the 20th frame. Those are different alternatives you can do. You can see on the 10th and 20th, we get that nice head bob that we saw earlier by moving the neck bone, and you can scrub through the timeline to see if that's what you like. If it is, you'll move on to the next frame and try to complete your animation. If you don't like it, you can delete keyframes. It's pretty straightforward on how animation works. If you're doing something simple, again, like I mentioned, I like to go simple first. The way I do it is start with one of the bone layers, like I am with the neck, and then start adding on the different body parts that you want to be moved. All those combined become your animation. It can get complex when you move each bone layer to the T. That's something that I haven't experimented as much, but I do in the future characters. I try to move different bones to get actual body movements for the new characters. I try not to go too complex because you're barely gonna see the animations sometimes. It just really depends on the game mechanic that you choose. But don't go too crazy. I just do so for learning purposes and improving. It's always good to practice on anything that you do. I grab this chest bone now and move it up and down. And that actually looks pretty cool because it's deforming the front part. So it's like somewhat of a horse type movement. As soon as I let go on the 10th frame in the timeline, a keyframe actually was recorded. That's because the record button was on, and that's how you can automatically just record your keyframes without having to press I. But I just do it just so that I know that I'm recording that specific keyframe for myself and also for the video. Sometimes if you're on a frame that already has a keyframe, it'll just replace it and you won't know what movements were recorded unless you actually were the one that pressed I to insert that keyframe. I'm scrubbing through in the chest bone, but we can actually see the movement for the neck that we created earlier. It doesn't show the keyframes, but still shows the animation. That's how you have to visualize now. Like, okay, now his head is bobbing. How will the chest move in combination of the head? You gotta be a little bit creative on how the movement is gonna be now, especially with a Frankenstein type character like this. You definitely have to be creative because there's no other character like this out there. You can't just go look for an animation that will work. You just have to eyeball everything, go with the flow, and determine what type of animation you're looking for your specific character. I always have one in mind, and that's just idle animation. What is it going to be doing when it's idle and just not doing anything in the game? Just sitting there in place and just moving, doing something that can show that it's being animated in your game mechanic or prototype. Just trying to get the idea across. For the chest at the 0 frame, I keyframed that position. At the 10th frame, I move it down by 0.05. I scrub through to see how the movement is. At the 0 frame, it's not doing anything, but as we move to the 10th frame, he moves his head up, but his back actually moves down. That's a pretty cool movement so far. At 20th frame, I move the chest back up by 0.05. Now when we scrub through, you can see his head move up, his back goes back. I expand the left side of the window and I add a dope sheet and change this to action editor. This is where I learned that all your actions, which is basically your animations, are recorded within Blender. You can actually see it visually. That's why at this point I was integrating that part into my process so that I can actually see the different keyframes that we have for all the different bone layers. In the summary, there's a neck and there's a chest. Those are the 2 rig layers that I moved to get this movement so far. I didn't do that with the previous characters because I didn't know that that was there. I actually learned it from watching various videos. Now being able to see that visually really helps. Now you can see the different layers that you moved without having to remember what you actually moved. Previously, I was just remembering, okay, I just moved like the head bone or the spine bone. I was doing that from memory. That's not a good way to approach it. It was good that I was able to start off with the action editor for character 2.1. Actually sets the tone for the future characters and how I actually animate. It's always good to improve your process to make your life easier. That's definitely something that I did for animation. I definitely use this quite a bit in my future characters. Definitely, you're going to learn a lot from the entire animation process. I hope you check out my future videos and find it super educational, but also helpful for your characters in the future. I appreciate you guys watching. Occasionally, I'll just grab different layers just to see what type of different movements we have available for us. You really got to visualize a lot for your animations. If you're trying to come up with a very unique animation, you have to be creative. There's just no way to do it because all your characters are going to be so unique that the movement has to come from you and you're going to have to do it on the fly too. I don't have any of this noted down at all anywhere. I'm just going in hands-on, moving things around, seeing what movements I like, seeing what works best with each other, and figuring out how to bring this character to life in the most simplest way that I can, but also in a way that I actually learned and improved something in my own process. That's going to help out with the next character. That's how my brain automatically thinks about everything. Okay, we moved these different bone layers in the previous characters. Let's just say the head bone and the spine bone or something. Now, the next time that we animate again, let's move the tailbone and try to create something different other than up and down or left and right. Try to create something more unique per character, and that just gives life to your characters. I don't know. I like the process. I like seeing things come alive because these were just doodles at one point, and then now you bring the doodles to life and it just becomes a fun entire process to create something awesome. As weird as these characters are getting, they're still characters. They still came from my mind, and seeing them come alive into fruition is just an awesome feeling. I enjoy the process. I like everything that I do with each character because I'm actually learning a lot with the entire process. I honestly think I'm getting a lot better because this is something that I've never done before in terms of creating my own characters. Being able to do it now on autopilot from muscle memory is actually a pretty cool thing that I was able to teach myself. This is a very important skill set that will really help my future games and also my future character development. I'm excited to see what cool things I create with all of the knowledge that I have, but also it's cool to record everything and be able to explain it in a way that helps people. I know a lot of people are going to have to go through this if they're trying to create their own characters that they came up with. It could just be like a bunch of doodles that they have in their notebook and they just wanted to create something simple with it. At least they'll be able to watch my videos, be like, hey, he started with something simple and was able to create something that was working, some sort of prototype. Maybe I can do that. That's my thought process with all that I'm doing now. I'm trying to, I guess, inspire people to create their own characters and just have fun with it. Sometimes you don't have to be super serious about the things that you're doing, especially if it's just for fun. These characters are super fun for me right now, and I'm just going with the flow. I just want to see all my characters come alive, and we'll just go from there. Whatever I come up with is whatever I come up with. I'm not being so hard on myself like I was in the past. I'm just trying to create now and then just put it out there. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, we got more characters coming. That's all that matters. I'm gonna keep going with the flow and let's get back to animating. All right, so what was I doing? Oh yeah, I decided to move one of the tweak bones for the tail. And I guess I like these keyframes at 0, 10, and 20. If I duplicate that, I go to the chest bone and duplicate those 3 as well. It looks like I'm completing the animation loop. Normally when I duplicate keyframes, that's pretty much going to be the animation, but I guess it's not. This is the beauty of keyframe animation. If you want to change something that you don't like, you can always undo and then go back to the original. For the neck, I duplicated the keyframes at the 10th and 20th frame. That gets the head bob going up and down again. But for the chest, I decided to move it up by 0.05 on the 30th frame, and then to move it down, I typed in -0.05. For this tail tweak, I moved it up by 0.05 on the 30th frame, and then down by typing in -0.05 to get it back to that original position. Yeah, normally I'll just type in 0.05 or 0.1 or something. If you want to move it down, but you'll type in a negative value. That's something simple to remember. That's the tip for animation if you're trying to do something simple. At least that's how I started. This animation for character 2.1 is already looking pretty cool between the 0 frame and the 40th frame. If you want to play the animation on a loop or something, you just type in where your loop is going to end under end, where this 250 is, and that will shorten your animation in the timeline. I typed in 39. That's going to loop back because our scene ends at the 40th frame, but you want to see it loop back to the front as soon as it gets to the scene before it. That's why I said at 39, because when it hits 40, it's basically hitting 0 again, and it starts the loop over. In the action editor, this is where you would rename your animation. I typed in idle animation. Once I'm done with my animations, I can create the outline now for character 2.1. Duplicate the character, rename it to outline, add a second material, rename that to outline. Under surface, change the principal BSDF to emission, and then change the color from white to black or whatever color you like, and check backface culling. In the vertex groups, you add a vertex group called outline, add the two modifiers, the mask and the solidify modifier. Solidify, flip normals, high quality normals, 1 for material index offset, offset to 1, shell vertex group to outline, vertex group to outline. To actually see the outline, you have to switch to material preview mode. For the viewport shading, move the solidify modifier above the mask modifier and adjust your thickness, and you'll be able to see that beautiful outline for your character. I do this process over and over so that I remember. At this point, it's muscle memory for me, but I know it's going to take some time for a lot of you. I try not to skip this part because it took a very long time for me to learn it. It's good to record the outline process and also repeat it multiple times so that I continuously remember, but also try to see if I can actually do it much faster the next time. There's really no way to fast track the outline process. It's just pretty much the same sequence every time to get the outline. I'm not making as much mistakes as I was in the previous characters if you've been watching my videos. I think we were having issues in a few of those characters at some point, but now I'm actually getting the hang of it and we won't have much of those errors in the future. If you want a smoother 3D model, you just select your body mesh, right click, shade smooth, and you have a smooth character 2.1. Nosy Tails, I think, was the name that I gave it earlier in this video. Nosy Tails. That's a very nice ring to it. Never heard that name from anyone. Never seen a character with that. We might go with that. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Now, the final thing to do is export the FBX. The settings here is usually selected objects, select armature, mesh, change to Z forward. Under armature, you uncheck add leaf bones. Under bake animation, you uncheck NLA strips. If you just want one specific action for your character, this is what I learned. Here's a tip. You uncheck all actions during this process too before you export the FBX. But I didn't do so for this character. Rename the FBX character 2_1_ and export. This is the first action that we did for character set number 2. You won't see that issue in BuildBox where random actions were showing up like they were for the first character set. That's basically how you would solve that issue. That's probably going to be in a future video when I have all this set up automatically where I don't have to continuously repeat the FBX export process. This will be our final 3D model for character 2.1 with the idle animation that we created, this time with a smooth body because that's what we were moving towards in the past based on my previous characters. This concludes the video for character 2.1. I hope you learned a lot from this entire process. I forget exactly certain things that I did, but we definitely added in the action editor to actually see the different bone layers that we're moving and also naming our animations, which is going to be helpful for all of our characters if we're going to have multiple animations, which we do in the future characters. I hope you've been enjoying my Blender workflow process that I'm still improving. We're going to bring this character to BuildBox and create something simple. As always, if you want to see that video, check it out. There'll probably be some sort of link in the description below, so be sure to watch that. Watch all the old characters if you haven't already. That's really going to help with this entire process. I appreciate that you guys do that. Just enjoy with all the new characters that I have. Hopefully we're going to come up with something that I will expand upon that will become a full game. That's going to be even more of a fun process to record. Anyways, please like and subscribe. I appreciate your help. Appreciate your time watching these videos. I'm enjoying this entire process. Let's get to the next video. Peace out. See you there.